Welcome to the Sky Commander Flight Brief. It's your mission-ready podcast for drone pilot training and aerial insights across Canada.
From Transport Canada rules to real-world drone ops, we break it down, take you higher, and help you earn your wings. Because here at skycommander.ca, we don't just fly.
It hints there's more to it. It's a masterclass, a deeper level, maybe a philosophy or a community focus, perhaps.
It's definitely intriguing, sets them apart from just, a basic tips show. Skycommander.ca is the obvious next step. Precisely. If you're thinking about flying a drone in Canada, boom, this content is aimed right at you.
Powered by skycommander.ca.
The elite podcast for Canada's drone pilot. Okay, let's get started. Today, we are focusing on a concept that it completely separates the amateurs from the true professionals in high-stakes operational environments. We're not just talking about running a better flight. We're talking about turning every single mission you fly successful or, messy into an immediate documented system upgrade.
Yeah.
We're launching into the world of the professional mission debrief.
And we need to be really clear up front here. This isn't just sitting around talking about your day.
Right.
That's therapy or, maybe just venting. We are talking about aviation-grade learning.
Aviation-grade. I like that.
It's a structured, non-negotiable process designed to capture facts, isolate the systemic weakness, and this is the key part, implement a solution instantly.
And this is born out of necessity, right?
Absolutely. For fields like infrastructure and utility operations, think power lines, massive substations, high-span bridge inspections. The financial and safety stakes are just so high that they are forced into this level of discipline.
There's no other way.
No other way. They have to treat every single mission as a data point in a much, much larger continuous improvement loop.
Exactly. So our mission today is to distill that rigor. Whether you fly drones for precision agriculture, advanced construction modeling, or, yes, critical infrastructure, we want to give you the core skills, the non-negotiable facts you must record, and the step-by-step engine, what we're calling the debrief loop, that separates true high accountability operations from simple improvisation. We want to make you quietly elite.
And we are pulling from the best documented practices globally. This isn't just theory. We're talking professional debriefing, standard operating procedures, deep case files, and the critical rules and concepts required by regulatory bodies.
So we're talking about the rule books.
We're talking the rule books. We'll be covering the non-negotiables from the Canadian Framework CARS, NAV Drone, RPOC, and the U.S. regulatory environment, FAA, LANC, Part 107.
So you're getting the internal playbook.
That's the goal. The methodology that professional flight teams use to consistently reduce risk and increase data quality. And it doesn't matter what the regulatory flavor is or, frankly, how big the load is.
Okay, let's unpack this. If the debrief is the engine for improvement, then the crew's mindset, that has to be the fuel.
That's a perfect analogy.
A debrief record is just a digital log until you apply the right perspective to it? If you're just sitting around complaining about how much electromagnetic interference there was at the substation, you're missing the point.
You are completely missing the point.
We've identified 5 core skills that make this whole debrief process effective, and it all starts with the foundation: fact discipline.
Fact discipline is the prerequisite for all meaningful learning. It's really about building a common reality for the team.
A shared reality.
A shared factual reality. You have to ruthlessly separate what happened, the specific, measurable, time-stamped reality, from why you think it happened, which is your subjective interpretation.
The story you tell yourself.
Exactly, this story. And if you skip this first step, the entire debrief just becomes an exercise in reinforcing whatever biases you walked in with.
Okay, so give us a concrete example. What's the difference between a low-fidelity fact and a high-fidelity fact in this context?
Great question. So a low-fidelity fact is, the drone drifted near the power line.
Okay, vague, I get it.
It's subjective noise. It's useless. A high-fidelity fact uses specific data points, probably extracted directly from the flight log metadata. You must write.
Okay.
At 14.22 local time, 18.22 Zulu, during the east-west traverse of segment ID 4A12, the drone's compass indicated an error warning, code 3005, twice.
Wow.
Corresponding with an unintended lateral drift of 3.8 feet from the programmed flight path, while the aircraft was at 120 feet AGL and 35 feet lateral standoff from the conductor.
Okay, that is incredibly specific. Why the obsession with that level of detail? Down to the error code and the actual measurement of the drift.
Because opinions drift, facts compound into patterns you can fix. It's that simple.
Okay, say more about that.
If you just write, it drifted, what's the assumed cause?
pilot messed up, or it was weedy.
Bad luck. Pilot error or bad luck, end of story. But if, across 20 different missions, you find that compass error 33005 consistently occurs when traversing steel trusses or energized substations at exactly 120 feet AGL.
Yeah. Now you have a pattern.
You've isolated a systematic environmental risk or maybe an altitude-specific electromagnetic blind spot in your hardware, and now you can actually fix this system.
Not just the pilot.
Never just the pilot. You change your SOP for that environment. Maybe you mandate a minimum standoff distance of 50 feet, or you require the use of manual flight modes only in that zone. That kind of pattern identification is absolutely impossible without high-fidelity facts.
And that focus on the pattern, it flows right into the second crucial skill, which is systems thinking. Most casual operators, and frankly, even some businesses, they stop when they find a person to blame. Pilot error. Investigation over. But in high-stakes aviation, whether it's crewed or uncrewed, that is the most useless conclusion you can possibly come to.
It's a cognitive dead end. It's lazy. You have to move beyond the human operator and ask, which layer failed that allowed the human to make that error?
Okay, so what are the layers?
We break it down into 4 key layers. First, the planning layer. Did we miss a critical step in the site survey? Did we fail to identify a specific airspace restriction or, a potential RF interference zone?
So, problems that started before you even left the office.
Days before. Second is the comms or procedure layer. Did the crew misinterpret a crucial call-out? Was the checklist you gave them inadequate, or was it missing a critical step for that environment?
So the tools you gave them to communicate were flawed.
Precisely. Third, equipment readiness layer. Were we using a failing battery? We track our batteries, so was it battery ID 4 that showed performance degradation last week? Was the sensor calibration out of date?
Things you should have caught in the workshop.
Exactly. And finally, number 4, the client alignment layer. Did the client fundamentally change the mission parameters mid-flight, putting stress on the system and forcing the crew to improvise?
That happens all the time. The while you're up there request.
The dreaded while you're up there. And I really appreciate that reframing. It moves the focus immediately from the punitive question, who caused this?
Which gets you nowhere.
To the far more productive question, what systemic failure or lack of procedure allowed this human error to occur?
So what's the core rule here?
The fundamental rule of systems thinking is this. If it can happen again, it's a process issue, not a one-off event. It's not bad luck.
Right. Lightning doesn't strike twice, but a bad process will fail every time.
A true systems thinker identifies the leverage point in the process, the missing instruction, the inadequate training, the equipment gap, that when you correct it, prevents the entire class of failures from ever reappearing.
You're fixing the operating system.
You are, not just patching the latest crash.
But implementing that system, that depends entirely on the third skill, which is much more about culture and psychology. It's risk judgment and honesty.
Yes.
This is about surfacing what the pros call soft safety drift.
Soft drift. It's the silent killer because it feels safe in the moment.
Yeah.
It really does. These are the small compromises that, while they seem minor individually, they accumulate. They stack up until they inevitably lead to a serious incident.
Can you give us a few vivid, relatable examples of what that soft drift looks like in practice? Let's step outside of just utilities for a second.
Absolutely. Let's say you're doing a high-end photogrammetry mission on a tight construction deadline.
Yeah.
Soft drift could be, number 1, rushing the battery swap.
Okay.
You skip the visual inspection for prop damage because the client is watching, and you don't want to look like you're wasting time.
Been there. The pressure is on.
Of course. Number 2, creeping closer. The client wants a detail shot on a historic facade, so you slowly override your pre-programmed standoff boundary by, say, 10 feet, because the lighting is perfect right now.
You're fudging the margins.
3, stretching the clock. You decide to run the last flight block on a battery that's showing 25% charge instead of the SOP mandated 35%, because you don't want to lose 15 minutes slopping and relaunching.
The one last shot syndrome. I think we have all been guilty of that one, especially when the light is fading or the deadline is looming.
It's so common.
I once pushed a battery on a windy day and had about 5 minutes of genuine panic trying to get it home as the voltage just dropped off a cliff.
And that feeling of panic, that momentary spike in heart rate and workload, that is the precursor to an incident.
Right.
The best teams, they surface that feeling immediately and without shame.
Mm-hmm.
Someone should be able to say in the debrief, I felt rushed, and I intentionally stretched the battery past the SOP limit.
And the response shouldn't be, you're in trouble.
Never. The response should be analysis. Why did the pilot feel rushed? Was it an external pressure, like an unscheduled client visit? Or was it an internal pressure from poor time management or an unrealistic flight plan?
So that culture of honesty, what some people call blame-free leadership, it's a crucial safety tool in itself.
It is the safety tool.
Because if surfacing those weak signals, like admitting you skipped a pre-flight check or had a momentary lapse in judgment, if that feels unsafe or career-limiting, the team will hide those behaviors.
Yeah, hide them every time.
And if they're hidden, those habits repeat until they cause a P4, an actual reportable incident.
We have a saying for this. We call the debrief the lab for learning, not the courtroom.
The lab, not the court. I like that.
Your goal is root cause analysis, not assigning guilt.
Yeah.
If you foster an environment where people focus on what allowed the risk to show up rather than who made the mistake, you maximize the team's willingness to be honest about those little drifts, and that immediately drives down your incident rate.
Okay, moving to the fourth crucial skill, which really defines the value proposition of the entire mission, data literacy and judgment.
Yes.
It's no longer enough just to bring back footage. We are in the business of delivering actionable information, the decision input.
Absolutely. You have to know what good data looks like for your specific mission. For a precision mapping project, good data means 85% forward overlap and 60% side overlap, confirmed by an initial processing check on site.
Okay.
For thermal inspection, it means consistency in your emissivity settings and, environmental notes that validate the readings. For utility inspection, it means complete coverage against the asset list, consistency in focus, and critically, metadata integrity.
What do you mean by metadata integrity?
Is the geotag and the asset ID permanently embedded in the file? And is it correct? Can the client system ingest it automatically?
That ability to judge the quality on the spot seems key.
It is the ultimate litmus test. The pilot and the data manager or whoever's on site must step back and say, is this data set complete, consistent, and does it directly answer the client's key question?
Right. And for a construction site, that question might be?
That might be. Does the current foundation pour a line within 5 centimeters of the CAD model? And if your data has gaps or shadow occlusions or motion blur that prevents that measurement,
the data is useless.
the data is useless.
Or conversely, and I think this is where the real professional judgment comes in, it's having the strength to declare, this footage is unusable for the client's decision, and we need to refly segment C right now before we derig.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That is a tough call to make on site. Maybe the sun glare obscured a critical fastener, or the motion blur on a zoomed-in shot makes a tension cable strand count unreadable.
Mm-hmm.
If the client can't confidently issue a work order, or approve a payment, or make a safety decision based on your data, then the mission, regardless of how flawlessly you flew the path, was a deliverable failure.
That's the difference between being a good pilot and being a professional operator.
That's it in a nutshell.
And that leads perfectly to the fifth skill, which kind of ties this all together, the clarity of communication.
We've touched on it, but it's so important it's worth restating. The debrief itself must be structured, it must be short, and it has to be focused.
No rambling.
No rambling. Avoid jargon and ambiguity. Everyone must leave that room knowing 3 things. What specific change are we making? That's the TPA. Who owns that change? And by when is it due?
Because without that,
as soon as you move from the debrief room to the next site, all those brilliant lessons will be instantly forgotten. You need that structure to enforce accountability to this system.
So to recap, fact, discipline gives you the raw material. Systems thinking gives you the context. Risk honesty gives you the input. Data literacy gives you the output metric. And clear communication turns it all into action.
That's a powerful framework for operational excellence.
Now we get into the forensic details. If the mission debrief is a full forensic package, we need to know what minimum data points have to be consistently captured.
Right.
Professionals don't just write down whatever they remember. They think in 5 structured buckets of non-negotiable information that ensure full compliance, safety analysis, and importantly, reproducibility.
And these buckets, they ensure you capture all the inputs necessary for troubleshooting, for compliance audits, and critically, for proving your diligence if an incident ever occurs.
Okay, let's start with bucket 1, mission metadata. This sounds like the always-on identification package, the identity tag for the whole operation.
And it needs to be granular.
Mm-hmm.
It's beyond just the obvious date and time, and local time is fine, but if you have distributed teams or international contracts, always add the Zulu time, which is UTC.
Good tip.
You need the exact location, the site name, and especially in infrastructure work, specific asset segment IDs.
Like pole numbers.
Pole numbers, circuit IDs, whatever the client uses. For high-fidelity record, you need the names of everyone involved, the remote pilot in command, the visual observer, the site contact, and the specific equipment.
You mean like the drone model?
More than that, the serial number of the aircraft, the payload type, and the firmware and app versions you use for that flight.
You stressed the importance of tracking batteries earlier. Why is that specific detail so non-negotiable?
Because batteries are so often the single point of failure. If you label your batteries 1 through 10, and you record battery ID 4 used for flight block 2, ending at 14% remaining, that allows for forensic analysis when that specific battery inevitably degrades faster or, God forbid, fails mid-flight on a later mission.
So you could trace it back.
If you don't track the ID, you cannot attribute the failure to the specific piece of hardware. It's an essential part of equipment readiness tracking.
Okay, and the environment. Wind and sun angle, those can feel like subjective measurements. How do you lock those down?
They are measurable, and they are critical for context. We need wind average speed and gust speed, temperature, visibility, and specifically for any thermal operations, you need the solar angle and the irradiance.
Why is sun so important for thermal?
Sun loading. It's direct thermal radiation from the sun hitting a structure. It can mimic or completely mask a real electrical hotspot. If you don't log the environmental context, your thermal data is ambiguous at best. You have to record this to validate your findings.
Okay, that diligence proves compliance. Which brings us to bucket 2, which is the compliance stack. Airspace, permissions, and site access. This is the legal foundation of the flight.
It is, and compliance is a multi-layered stack. You have to document every single layer. We require recording the airspace classification as operated.
What does that mean, as operated?
It means, for example, Class E airspace at 250 feet AGL. You log all your authorizations and waivers, LENC and SFOC in Canada, or a Part 107 waiver, and the explicit limits of those authorizations.
So it's at 200 feet.
If your authorization said 200 feet AGL, that 200 feet is logged as the legal hard boundary for that mission. No exceptions.
And what about site-specific checks, like NOTAMs?
You log the completion of all NOTAM checks and you record what was relevant. For example, TFR for presidential movement 50 miles away, no impact. But the most critical part of this bucket is recording any conflicts.
Conflicts with who?
The client, security, anyone on site. If the client asked you to fly outside your legal limits, say flying over a road without the necessary traffic management plan, you record the request, your refusal based on compliance, and how you legally fulfilled their need instead.
So you're covering yourself.
You're recording these conflicts to protect your future operating status during any audit.
Bucket 3 is safety and hazards. And here, we're not just recording failures. You said we're hunting precursors, those small signals of drift.
The precursor hunt is where you become proactive instead of reactive. You record every single hazard you encountered. RF sources, energized equipment, unexpected pedestrian traffic, aggressive wildlife.
Aggressive wildlife is a real thing.
Oh, it's a very real thing. Ask any environmental survey pilot. Crucially, you log any loss of separation moments. That means anytime you got uncomfortably close to structures, wires, or people, or if the drone came too close to its own defined operational volume boundary.
And every little warning, beep.
Every sensor warning, every minor link issue, and any near miss, even if no damage occurred, must be logged factually. No emotion, just the facts.
Let's really elaborate on that precursor classification system you mentioned. How do professionals actually tier these events to trigger a systematic change?
It's a simple but powerful 4-tier system. It's how you manage risk trends. It starts with P1 nuisance noted.
P1.
Okay. These are minor, non-systemic issues. An example would be a temporary brief RF interference spike that's self-corrected, or a momentary low battery warning because the temperature dropped unexpectedly.
Yeah.
You log them, but they don't immediately change your SOPs.
Got it. What's P2?
P2 trend, risk meaningful precursor. This is an event that indicates a clear operational drift or a trend that violates your SOP. This requires a debrief and an immediate discussion.
An example.
The pilot momentarily violated the 50-foot mandatory standoff rule twice during the critical phase of the mission. Or the VO reported losing visual contact for more than 3 seconds, even though the pilot maintained control. If a P2 occurs 3 times in a single month, it should trigger mandatory retraining.
So you're watching for the trend. Next is P3.
P3 serious precursor close call. This is an abnormal event that required an improvised, urgent maneuver to prevent an incident. It might result in a system failure, but not necessarily physical damage.
Like what?
A sudden, unexpected wind gust required maximum stick deflection to prevent hitting a structure. Or the control link was completely lost for 10 seconds, forcing the use of return to home. These often require a mandatory operational pause for the whole team.
And finally, the worst case, P4.
P4, incident accident. This is an event resulting in damage, injury, or requiring formal reporting to the regulatory body, like the FAA or Transport Canada.
That stratification is incredibly powerful because it turns those anecdotal "phew, we got lucky" moments into actual quantifiable risk data.
That's the whole point. And this bucket, it has to include the silent killer of human factors. We need to record task saturation moments, those brief periods where the workload spikes so high.
Launch and landing.
Launch, landing, a sudden gust, managing an incursion, anytime the crew's capacity was maxed out.
Right.
We also have to log undocumented heroics.
Undocumented heroics. What's that?
The improvised, non-SOP moves that save the mission. If the pilot had to pull off some complex, non-standard recovery maneuver, that is a future incident in disguise.
Why? Because it's not repeatable.
Exactly. It shows that the plan failed and had to be saved by individual skill, which is totally unsustainable in a professional system. The next pilot might not be able to pull that off.
Okay, bucket 4, execution performance. This is where you measure efficiency and how well you stuck to the playbook.
Right, we're comparing the plan versus reality. First question, did you follow the flight plan and the blocks? If not, why not? You track all the deviations. Was it bad site intel? Was it weather, client escort delays, equipment issues?
And comms.
Second, comms. Log what worked and what failed. Did the callouts, altitude, remaining battery, hazard approach, did they follow the script? Did the VO and RPIC maintain sterile comms during critical phases?
Meaning no unnecessary chatter.
Zero unnecessary chatter.
Yeah.
And third, time. This is crucial for profitability. Log the setup time, flight time, and the causes of all delays. If the client escort was 45 minutes late, that's a recorded performance issue against the client, which informs how you price the next bid.
Smart. That brings us to the final bucket, bucket 5, data quality and deliverables, the ultimate proof of success.
This is the financial core of the mission. Was coverage complete against the client-provided shot list? Were there any gaps? And if so, why? Maybe you were denied access to one corner of the property.
You document everything.
Everything. You document all the quality issues. Focus problems, motion blur, exposure shifts, glare from the sun, or physical occlusions like a tree branch blocking a vital survey point. And if you're using advanced sensors like thermal or LiDAR, you record settings, consistency, environmental constraints, calibration notes. The works.
The ultimate litmus test here is actionable data, but I want to challenge you on the implementation of this. If I'm running a high-volume construction site mapping project, how do I practically implement the on-site data acceptance test without adding hours to the job?
It requires discipline, but it saves days of rework. The KPA is a mandatory stop and check after the first 1 or 2 flight blocks.
Yes, the first few.
That's all you need to establish a baseline. For a mapping project, you pull the imagery onto a field laptop and run a quick check of the overlap percentage and the ground sample distance, the GSD. You zoom way in on a critical feature, say the corner of the foundation, and check for motion blur.
And for utility work?
You check the readability of the first 2 pole tags. The rule is simple. No ID equals no value. If you cannot read the critical identification tag, the entire data set is worthless for issuing a work order.
Wow.
If you leave the site without this verification, you risk a 100% loss of mission value. The goal is decision-grade data, not just storage-grade data.
That level of detail, captured consistently across those 5 buckets, is what allows us to move into the true engine of improvement, the continuous improvement loop.
Yes, that's where the magic happens.
Debriefing without clear, accountable action is, as you said, just therapy. The goal of this process is not learning for learning's sake. It's about creating corrective and preventive actions, or KPA. And this leads us to the rigorous 4-step engine that professionals use, the debrief loop.
And the debrief loop is simple in concept, but it's non-negotiable in its execution. Step 1, capture. Document the facts only, using the 5 buckets we just discussed.
Facts only.
Step 2, compare. You measure those facts against 3 things: the original plan, your defined SOPs and rules, and the client requirements and deliverables.
So plan, rules, and results.
Yeah, exactly. Step 3, correct. This is where you fix the issue immediately and then design a system to prevent its repeat. This is the KPA phase. And finally, step 4, confirm. You record the change, you assign an owner, you set a due date, and most critically, you define how you will verify its success.
Let's focus intensely on step 3 and 4, correct and confirm, because that's where most organizations, I think, they fail. They have the meeting, but nothing changes.
It's the most common failure point.
So when you turn a lesson into a KP, you need specific, measurable criteria.
A strong action is small, it's specific, and it's testable. It has to define the specific change. Is it an SOP update, a checklist revision, new training, or new gear? It needs a named owner and a deadline. But the part that's so often skipped is the verification method.
The proof.
How will you prove this change actually worked during the next mission?
Okay, let's revisit that example of the VO lost visual issue, but let's build out the full KP cycle for it.
Perfect. So, the issue identified is VO lost visual contact behind a large cell tower structure twice during the Northeast Pass. That's the fact.
Okay.
The corrective action, which is the immediate fix, is a new VO positioning rule is mandated. VO must move to the designated secondary observation point before the aircraft passes beyond 80% line of sight. And this requires an immediate checklist update.
So you fix it for tomorrow. But what about the system?
That's the preventive action, the system fix. You add sun angle structure occlusion check to the pre-mission site survey SOP. This requires the team to use a sun path calculator to anticipate blind spots and pre-plan 2 VO positions before they even leave the office.
And the critical final step, verification.
The verification method. Next 4 missions involving high vertical structures. 0 lost visual events recorded in the safety precursor log in bucket 3. If you meet that verification, the new SOP is locked in. If it fails, the TPA stays open and a stronger action like mandatory structure-specific training is required.
That verification step, setting the goal state, that feels like the magic ingredient. Now, this level of discipline, it isn't just good business. In high-stakes environments, regulation often mandates it.
That's right. Regulations, especially in Canada, are huge drivers of operational discipline. Under the Canadian Aviation Regulations, or CARRs, the rule is explicit. If you have an aviation safety incident, you are required to stop operations, perform an analysis, take corrective actions, and retain all of those records for 12 months.
So your structured debrief log is your proof of compliance.
It's your proof of diligence and accountability.
And our sources highlight a critical Canadian concept that really defines the professionalism required. The idea of the operational volume.
Operational volume is a term that defines your safety buffer. It's the specific 3-dimensional space your drone is intended to occupy, the flight path, plus the mandatory protective buffers around the edges of that space.
Give me an example.
If you are inspecting a bridge, your operational volume includes the bridge structure itself, the vertical airspace above it, and maybe a 100-foot lateral buffer zone on all sides where you have exclusive safe control.
And why does defining this matter so much under the Canadian rules?
Because CARs explicitly require the site survey to determine that the operational volume is suitable and safe before you even think about flying. If your definition is sloppy and a pedestrian or another aircraft enters that space, you are immediately in violation because you failed to protect your boundaries.
So it forces you to think about safety as a physical, measured bubble that you control.
A bubble you own and are responsible for. It's not just a general idea.
And this rigor, this is what really distinguishes current visual line of sight, or VLSS, operations from the future of beyond visual line of sight, BLOS.
The transition from VLOS to BVLOS is fundamentally a shift in procedural maturity.
That's so.
BVLOS, visual line of sight, is like managing the system by looking out the windshield.
Yeah.
You react to what you see. BVLOS is managing the system entirely via instruments, data, and contingency design.
There's no vibe check.
There is no vibe check or last-second visual input allowed. The system itself has to be robust, documented, and capable of automated contingency maneuvers.
So when Canada phases in the new RPAS operator certificate, the RPOC, in 2025, and moves toward more BVLOS and EVLOS approvals, what are the procedural changes that replace the eyes on the windshield?
You're replacing the human eye with formalized procedures and technology. This means your manuals need detailed sections on things like 1. Telemetry thresholds,
Okay.
predefined limits for signal strength, GPS health, battery voltage that mandate a procedural response like an immediate return-to-home initiation.
So it's not the pilot's judgment call anymore.
It's a system rule. 2. Redundant systems. Detailed SOP for managing failures in primary systems, how the redundant GPS or IMU is activated, and how the pilot interprets that secondary data. And 3. Detect and avoid, or DAA, protocols.
It is a huge topic.
A huge topic. Procedures for how the pilot uses electronic surveillance or onboard DAA tech to manage separation from other crewed aircraft. This requires much higher levels of data literacy in the debrief process. You have to be able to log and justify every single alert.
So if that's the future, you have to master compliance now. For our U.S. listeners, let's quickly cover those permission acronyms again to make sure they stick.
We use mnemonic aids to ensure clarity. LAANC is your gateway into controlled U.S. airspace. It's the low-altitude authorization and notification capability. Just remember, LANC, let ATC know. Click.
That's for.
It automates controlled airspace access, usually up to 400 feet AGL where it's available.
Yeah.
And you must adhere strictly to whatever altitude you're authorized for.
And NOTAMs, the non-negotiable time-sensitive restrictions.
And mnemonic for that is NOTAM, not a maybe.
Chuckles, I like that.
They're regulatory hard stops. And this reinforces that common misconception we see all the time. I'm allowed to be on the client's property does not mean I'm authorized to fly in that airspace.
Two totally separate layers of the permission stack.
Entirely separate. And both have to be satisfied and documented in Bucket 2.
Okay, so once we have the Carrier engine and the compliance framework built, the final crucial steps of the loop are about building a predictive capability, tracking trends, and building tripwires.
This is how the elite operators stop reacting and start predicting.
Yeah.
And you don't need expensive software to do it. You can create a simple shared log. A cloud-based spreadsheet is fine. And just use simple tags.
The kind of tags.
Safety precursor.
Yep.
And you can add the P level, P1, P2, P3, data gap, comms breakdown, equipment anomaly. Keep it simple.
And what's the cadence for review? You can't just let it sit there.
No. Every month, dedicate 20 minutes to review this log. Apply the Pareto principle. Identify the top 3 recurring issues that consumed 80% of your time or pose the highest risk.
And then?
Then you get focused in your fix. Implement one specific SOP update, one targeted training drill, and maybe one small equipment upgrade, like investing in a better field monitor. This disciplined, monthly cycle, it prevents improvement fatigue and ensures you only focus on the highest leverage points.
That feeds directly into building tripwires, which you described as rules that catch operational drift before it crosses the line into an incident.
Tripwires are non-negotiable, early warning rules that force a mandatory pause and reassessment. They are designed to remove the emotional, I think I can finish this impulse from the decision.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. An environmental tripwire. 2 sensor warnings, like a compass error or a sustained wind gust over 20 knots, equals a mandatory pause and reassess. A procedural tripwire. If the pre-flight checklist is interrupted by a non-crew member, the crew must restart the checklist from the beginning.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And a data tripwire for high-value missions. If the mandatory on-site data acceptance test fails the readability check for 2 consecutive assets, operations cease immediately and the RPIC must call the office before continuing.
So you're formalizing the moment where you have to stop relying on instinct and revert back to the documented procedure.
Exactly.
The rigor enforced by utility and infrastructure work gives us this treasure trove of case files. So let's dissect some classic operational failures and extract the lessons that transfer to any field.
Yes, let's. We'll focus on the full cycle. The failure, the fact capture, the systems learning, and the final KPA.
Okay, case file A, the substation that eats compasses. A classic GNSS anomaly from electromagnetic interference.
A classic, the failure. The crew was flying a close-in inspection of a high-voltage substation perimeter. They captured P2, trend risk, precursors, intermittent compass warnings, momentary signal degradation, and a minor lateral drift of about 5 feet near some dense switchgear.
And what did the pilot do?
The pilot correctly recognized the risk, increased their standoff, and aborted the high-risk close-pass segment. They completed the rest of the mission with wide coverage only. A good call.
So the debrief learning here isn't that the drone is broken, but that the environment itself is a predictable source of risk.
Exactly. The systems learning is that this environment risk is systemic and predictable in high-density metal and energized environments. The initial planning layer failed to adequately account for the magnetic interference.
And the CPA?
The EPA is to implement a formal, mandatory, high EMI flight mode, SOP. This new SOP mandates 3 things. 1, a minimum standoff distance of, say, 75 feet lateral, regardless of structure height. 2, a reduced maximum flight speed, maybe 5 meters per second. And 3, a formal warning ladder.
A warning ladder.
Warning number 1, a sensor anomaly means you switch to ADTI or manual mode and increase altitude. Warning number 2, any uncommanded drift means a mandatory conservative retreat, maneuver immediate stable ascent, and you only fly wide coverage from then on.
So what's the universal lesson there for someone who's inspecting a downtown bridge or a complex oil refinery?
You must formalize a conservative retreat maneuver for any environment known to lie to your sensors. Predict that your GPS or compass will fail near large metal masses, and predefine your safe, non-GPS dependent maneuver before you even launch.
Okay, next. Case file B, the NOTAM surprise. This is a pure compliance stack failure.
Yep, the failure. The NOTAM check was completed by the planning team on a Monday for a Wednesday mission. On Wednesday morning, the crew on site failed to recheck the NOTAMs.
I can see where this is going.
Mid-mission, they get an urgent notification that a new temporary flight restriction, a TFR for VIP movement, now overlaps their corridor. It forced an immediate operational pause, and it reduced their scope by 30%. The loss was time and client confidence.
The lesson is obvious. Airspace authorization is time-sensitive.
So obvious, the system's learning. The planning process was too linear. Compliance is dynamic and requires verification immediately prior to launch. The key PAA. Implement a mandatory two-step tripwire. NOTAM check equals planning day plus launch day verification checklist item. This has to be signed off by the RPAC within 60 minutes of the planned takeoff time.
And the universal lesson.
Yesterday's truth expires. This applies to TFRs for sporting events, military operations, or temporary local restrictions everywhere. Always check right before you fly.
Case file C is probably the most common conflict in professional settings. Client pressure versus compliance.
We see this one all the time. The failure. A crew in the U.S. had a LAANC approval for 200 feet AGL to inspect a large commercial roof. The client arrives on site and, seeing the drone up, asks them mid-flight to just pop up to 350 feet to get that one wide perspective shot.
And what did the pilot do?
The RPIC correctly declined, but the exchange was difficult, it was awkward, and it created friction.
So how does the debrief address this human factor failure? It's not a technical problem.
No, it's not. The system's learning. The failure was the absence of a proactive, standardized communication strategy. The crew was forced to improvise a refusal under pressure, the key PA. Create a pre-flight client script in a mandatory role-play training drill.
Role-play, really?
Yes, really. The RPIC has to practice saying no cleanly and providing a legal alternative. The script has to include something like, I understand the request for 350 feet, but our FAA authorization limits us to 200 feet AGL at this location. Going higher would void our certificate and our insurance.
And then you give the alternative.
I can legally achieve that perspective using the Zoom payload from 200 feet or by repositioning to a lower elevation. Furthermore, the debrief required logging the client's request and the RPIC's compliant refusal in Bucket 2 for liability protection.
Professionalism is saying no cleanly and documenting it.
That's it.
Let's look at case file D, the data integrity trap. This is maybe the most financially devastating failure mode for mapping professionals.
It can be. The failure. A company was contracted to perform complex photogrammetry for a massive highway interchange construction site. They flew all the flight lines perfectly, 100% coverage. Looked great.
Right.
But when the data was processed 2 days later, it was discovered that a high percentage of the detail shots had motion blur, and the crucial ground control points, the GCPs, were obscured by vehicle shadows. This made the final 3D model accuracy unacceptable.
Ouch.
It forced a massive 2-day refly. Very expensive.
So the failure mode is deliverable failure, and it's caused by a breakdown in on-site quality control.
Exactly. The system's learning. Flight skill is secondary to data readability. The on-site QC check was on their procedure, but it lacked rigor. The CPA. A mandatory GSD and focus check was added to the flight termination checklist. After Block 1, the crew has to zoom in on 3 random images captured in high detail mode to verify sharpness and confirm that the primary measurement targets GCPs, asset IDs, foundation corners, are shadow-free and readable.
And the universal data rule from that.
Coverage is useless if detail isn't readable. You must verify actionable quality before you leave the site.
Case file E deals with thermal inspection, which introduces a lot of subjectivity. The failure pattern is the pilot overclaiming an urgent defect based on a hotspot, only to find out later the reading was ambiguous.
A very common early mistake in thermal. The failure? Pilot observes a hotspot on an insulator, calls it a critical urgent defect, which is a P3 precursor, but the post-analysis shows that delta T, the temperature difference, was too low to be conclusive. It was potentially just influenced by direct sunlight hitting the equipment at that specific time of day.
So the mistake was escalating emotion or their interpretation instead of just the evidence.
You nailed it. The system's learning. Thermal data is useless without environmental context and standardized reporting language. The COPA. 2 things. 1, standardize the thermal language in the debrief in Bucket 5. Mandate using objective phrasing like thermal anomaly observed, delta T of 5 degrees Celsius noted, verification recommended, instead of subjective claims like urgent defect.
And the second thing.
2, implement a thermal validity checklist. Mandate flying thermal missions only within specific wind thresholds, like below 10 knots, and within specific time blocks to avoid peak sun loading, like between 9 and 11:30 a.m. You're limiting the environmental constraints. The rule is escalate evidence, not emotion.
Let's wrap up this section with a quick-fire review, synthesizing what we're calling the infrastructure DNA, the 12 biggest lessons that transfer everywhere, regardless of what you're flying.
This is your summary playbook for achieving that quiet excellence.
Okay, number 1, permission is a stack. You need airspace from FAA or CARS, property from the client, social, which is public management, and SOP, your own internal rules. All 4 have to be satisfied.
2, pre-flight is where missions are won. If your planning is rigorous, your flight execution looks like talent, not luck.
3, small errors compound fast. Rushing the process is the number 1 precursor to incidents, a P2 or P3 classification.
4, data quality beats flight skill. Mission success is defined by the actionability of the output, not the beauty of the flight path.
5, you need a client-grade finish. The rehire decision is based on how easy you make their life after you've packed up and left.
6, the public is part of the environment. Treat social friction, curiosity, fear, a challenging interaction like to treat wind. You have to manage it proactively with communication and compliance.
7, safety is a measured system. It requires defined boundaries, minimum standoff distances, and non-negotiable abort triggers, your tripwires.
8, the debrief is your fastest path to leveling up. If you apply the GP loop to every single mission, you will outgrow 90% of pilots in terms of procedural maturity within a year.
9, comms discipline is a force multiplier. Short, clear callouts and readbacks maintain sterile comms, and they reduce chaos during high workload phases.
10, authorization altitude is a hard boundary, not a preference. Flying within your compliance limits protects your future operating status.
11, equipment reliability matters more than features. Focus your forensic attention on battery health, tracking them by ID, and having strict firmware control.
And finally, 12, professionalism is a safety tool. Calm competence, clear pre-briefs, and a clean setup. They all signal control and they reduce external friction and client pressure.
That was an immensely detailed deep dive. We've moved way beyond the theory of improvement here, covering the forensic requirements with the 5 buckets, the process engine that turns lessons into mandated change with the CAPA loop, and how the high-stakes world of utility work forces a mastery of compliance and quality that makes any mission, anywhere, easier.
The mission was to provide you with the shortcut to becoming what we call quietly elite. And remember the goal. A real debrief produces 3 deliverables every single time. A factual record, which is the 5 buckets, a learning extraction, the systems analysis, and a change package, which is the CPA.
And if you don't leave with that change package?
If you don't walk away from the conversation with the change package, 1 to 3 specific dated verified actions assigned to an owner, you just reminisced about the flight. You didn't debrief.
To solidify this entire structure, the 5 buckets, the principles, the KPE requirements, we have a powerful mnemonic aid that the pros use. Use this to guide your debrief immediately after your next operation. We call it utility.
Let's run through it.
Unexpected events. Did anything surprising happen? Even a P1 nuisance should be noted down.
T traffic and airspace. Were all your authorizations and NOTAMs respected? Any incursions or conflicts?
Integrity of data. Was the data complete? Was it clear? And was it correctly tagged with asset IDs and metadata? Did it pass that on-site QC check?
L limits respected. Did we fly within our legal altitude, our standoff distance, and our operational volume boundaries?
Instrument health. How did the batteries perform? By ID. Were there any sensor warnings, link issues, or unexpected telemetry problems?
Team performance. How were the VO comms, the workload management, and adherence to those sterile communication phases?
And finally, why your next change? That is the KPA package, 1 to 3 specific system upgrades assigned and dated for verification.
That's the whole sister in one word.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought. The fastest way to truly level up isn't just documenting your failures. That's actually easy, because failure forces your hand. The true sign of excellence is documenting success. For your next mission, even if it goes perfectly, dedicate 15 minutes to defining the success recipe, the exact environment, the settings, the procedures that worked flawlessly, and convert that into a standard operating procedure.
Because if you don't document success and formalize it, you'll eventually drift back to average. You will. And you'll find yourself wondering why your operational performance suddenly dropped.
That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.